getting that much closer. A couple of weeks from the first football game of the college football game of the year, and then obviously just right at 22 days before Oklahoma kicks it off.
Yeah, tomorrow being Saturday, and then add 3 weeks to that, add 2 weeks for any kind of college football. If you're just into just watching anybody play on that Saturday, there's a few games, but of course, the Sooners get underway with just about everybody else that following Saturday. So we should probably start right there with any word on fall camp, any young players standing out, anything that you've picked up.
Yeah, I actually have a pretty. I think so. The one difference is Venables has been very, very, very much more open in terms of his practices and stuff like that. Let
Not
the media.
surprisingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Not surprisingly, he had let the media watch practice. I think twice this week. Now I do think that that's probably about about it for now. I think they're moving to the rugby fields there on the campus of Oklahoma, where their Venables had talked about this is going to be the 10 toughest practices of the year, kind of getting them ready. But no, a lot of good notes just across the board. From a quarterback perspective, Dillon Gabriel's doing everything that you would expect him to do. He looks on film maybe even a little bit quicker in some of his rollouts and things like that, moving around the pocket than even he did. So I I would suggest there's a little bit of agility and foot speed work that he has done through the summer. But everything looks really really solid with him. Has a total grasp on the offensive playbook. I think look down the depth. I think Davis Bevel has really solidified himself as that number two player, which I think a lot of us thought that would be the case coming in with the only other quarterback on the roster with any kind of measurable experience at the FBS level. So I think he's there where you would expect, and certainly some battles are going on for that third the third string area. But I think you feel good where you're at if you're a Oklahoma fan with Dillon Gabriel and then Davis Bevel there as well. Then as we move kind of to the running back position, Eric Gray is the guy. He's going to be your starter day one. I mean, I think there's even something that Levy had talked about through some of his press conferences, before the actual fall camp started, and talked about he's going to be there. It starts with Eric Gray, so I think that obviously put an end to any kind of not necessarily competition, but any kind of controversy in terms of who's going to be that starting running back. I think Javante Barnes has been hobbled a little bit with I think an ankle injury, nothing serious, but just it has been out. So I think there's been a couple of guys that have really taken advantage of having him out. Marcus Major, I would say right now he's probably the backup running the number two running back from everything that I've seen and heard. And then I think the guy that's really taken a great opportunity of this time is Gavin Sawchuk. So he's a guy that the team has basically said is the best, or sorry, not the best, the fastest player on the team. So I think it'll be interesting to see. I think he'll certainly play in the 4 games, just in 4 games, just to get his um, just to get those 4 games in, but then trying to decide if looks like a redshirt season. I think they're a little bit more, obviously, a lot more depth in that running back room. And then from a wide receiver perspective, I think there's 3 guys that have really kind of risen to the top from a depth chart perspective. I think that's when you look at Drake Stoops, Marvin Mims, and Jalil Farouk. I think those are the 3 guys that will probably be your starters. Theo Weiss and a 4 wide receiver set there. But I think you're seeing really good things. Obviously, Weiss, really good things from J.J. Hester, L.B. Bunkley-Ship, and then just some other guys. So I think you like your depth. There's a lot of outside of Weiss, and he's still unproven to a certain degree. And Mims, you've got a lot of, and then of course Stoops, you've got a lot of unproven talent. So will be interesting to see how that comes across. And then kind of looping the offensive line and the defensive line together. to everything I've heard, there is it's night and day, the bodies on both of these groups. Would you expect that would be probably the two groups that would gain the most from a strength and conditioning perspective? I think there's a different level of toughness. There's a different level of physicality, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, which you would expect as teams playing early on with a lot of, I think, a lot of focus, a lot of kind of anger, attitude, hostility, things like that. All things that you would expect from a Venables coach defense. I think there's a couple of interesting things on the offensive line perspective. I think you've got a true freshman in Jacob Sexton who is really pushing Wanye Morris from a tackle at the tackle spot. I don't know specifically, Mark, if that really lends that to believe that Sexton is coming in and is performing extremely well, as a true freshman, or if it's more of an indictment on Wanye not necessarily playing to his capability. So we'll see how that continues to go through, but through fall camp. But he's pushing him, and Tyler Guyton, a guy that transferred over from TCU, a young kid, hasn't played a ton. Really at the offensive line position, but anytime you've heard Venables talk, whether it would be in some of the spring stuff and then summer, obviously, he's really talked about Guyton as a guy that he's mentioned several times. So I think he's a guy probably not ready for a starting spot, but I think he could be a backup, or at worst, provide that depth. At the tackle position. And then as we move over to the defensive line, I think you're pretty solidified with your starting defensive line of Ethan Downs. Then you've got the transfer from Tulane, Jeffrey Johnson. And then you've got Jalen Redmond, and then Marcus Stripling at the other edge position. They've talked a lot about Redmond. He has done best summer of his life, from what I've heard, in terms of what he's been able to do, on the field strength. He's up right at about 300, maybe a little bit above. I think that's the biggest that he's played at. So I think he's had an outstanding fall camp, really a good summer, everything that you would expect and want him to have. I think he's out. He's had a little bit of a slight concussion that he's been dealing with, so he's been out a couple of days here, but nothing too serious. Another guy you kind of mentioned, younger guys that have kind of not really separated themselves, but kind of been a focal point. Kelvin Gilliam is a guy that from what I've heard, has really improved his consistency making plays. Obviously, he comes in as a redshirt freshman, played some last year, had the body type, I think, coming in, but didn't necessarily have the mentality that you would look for. And obviously that's kind of understandable from a freshman perspective, but have really heard that that's changed, that he's going to be able to provide Oklahoma a lot of depth on the defensive line. I think this is a defensive line on all on all three positions, whether you look at end, whether you look at inside or at the edge position, is going to be able to go 2-3 deep comfortably. Now, this is something that we heard last year, so we take that with a little bit of grain of salt, knowing that obviously there's a different staff here, but there's a lot of optimism at this time of the year last year with how good this defense looked and how good this defense could be. So I think, at least for me, I'm taking a very cautiously optimistic viewpoint, on this. And I mean, to a certain degree, when you see some of this stuff, it's a little bit different. But when you get practice notes from others, you don't quite, or what you see, you don't quite know. But I think it's a little bit different this year, being able to actually see it a little bit more than we've seen in the past. And as we go further into the defense, I think Danny Stutzman and David Agwebu is having a really solid battle between the two of them. From a linebacker position perspective. Then when you move into the secondary a little bit, you've got Woody Washington, who is he's most assuredly going to be one of your starting cornerbacks. And I think DJ Graham has done a lot of good things that make you believe in camp that he's absolutely going to be your other starter. Still good competition. I think Josh Eaton has played really well early on in the camp as well. A guy that I think we talked about a little bit as well, Mark. That's really kind of started to turn the table a little bit, just in his seriousness and approach to the game, and it looks like that's kind of manifesting itself on the field at least early on. But I think the guy in the secondary, honestly, that has done a just a tremendous job from where he came in the spring is Justin Harrington, and so kind of interesting that you kind of displayed that right there on the screen. Is he's done just an outstanding job, and I think he's played himself into a starting spot in some way. Now, whether that's the cheetah position, whether that ends up being at the nickel, um, will be interesting to see. But if he keeps going, Venables in his own way, Venables doesn't really necessarily go out of his way to specifically pay compliments to people to these kids, but he was very glowing when he spoke about Justin Harrington, and I think the position flexibility that he gives Oklahoma, as I mentioned, both at the nickel and at the cheetah right now. So if his progression keeps going, really, I think, Mark, the way it is right now, I think he has an opportunity to start at one of those two positions. I think, as I mentioned, and things change and it'll be interesting right now. I think yesterday was the first day that they were in full pads, so it'll be interesting. Things look a little bit different from a physicality perspective when you have obviously when you have full pads on as opposed to just the shoulder pads. But I think that will be very intriguing because I think right now, Mark, you probably have four of your five starters pretty well solidified in the back end. In my opinion, I think you got DJ Graham and Wood corners. I think you got Key Lawrence and Billy Bowman as your two safeties, and now you've got this you've got this cheetah position and then the nickel back where there's a good healthy competition going on there. You've got Justin Broyles there. You guys, as I mentioned, you've got Harrington. You've got you've got the transfer from North Carolina, Trey Morrison, in the mix there. So you've got a lot of good healthy competition there. But you like what you hear just overall, and I think that obviously there was a little bit of uh, there's a little bit of distraction, within the team. But everything that I've heard, Mark, is that the team there's not a lot of discussion about that internally. They've kind of moved on, and they're just laser focused on the first game, and